Wolf Tales, produced by TEMNO TV. Introduction. The forest breathed, a living entity of rustling leaves and snapping twigs under the cloak of a moonless night. Deep within its shadowed heart, in a den carved from the roots of an ancient oak, slumped a figure tormented by a war raging within. This was not just any wolf. This was Zeke, the one whispered about in hushed tones around crackling fires. The big bad wolf. But the name felt like a shackle. A cruel jest of fate. Zeke stared at his reflection in a murky puddle. The lupine features contorted in a silent snarl of frustration. The sharp teeth, the piercing yellow eyes, they screamed monster, a label he desperately wanted to shed like old fur. He yearned for something different, a chance to be the giant good wolf, a protector, not a terror. A tremor ran through his large frame, not from cold, but from the familiar, unwelcome stirring within. It was a primal urge, a hunger that went beyond flesh and bone. It was the echo of the big bad, a phantom gnawing at his control. He clenched his powerful jaws, each muscle straining against the rising tide of instinct. He remembered the whispers, the fear in the eyes of the little pigs, the frantic squeals that had once sent a thrill of dark satisfaction through him. Now, the memories were like shards of glass in his soul, each one a painful reminder of the creature he was forced to be. Suddenly, a twig snapped just outside the den entrance. Zeke's head shot up, his senses instantly on high alert. His ears swiveled, catching the faint rustle of leaves, the almost imperceptible shift in the night air. It could be anything, a deer, a rabbit, or something else. Something that triggered the old, unwanted programming. He held his breath, every muscle coiled and ready. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, a pair of glowing red eyes pierced the darkness just beyond the opening. They were small, close to the ground. Too small for a deer. A guttural growl rumbled in Zeke's chest, a sound he couldn't suppress. The red eyes blinked slowly, and a high-pitched giggle echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down Zeke's spine that had nothing to do with fear. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated malice. Snap. A small, gnarled hand shot through the den entrance, its fingernails long and wickedly sharp. It scrabbled at the ground, its touch sending a jolt of icy dread through Zeke. He recoiled instinctively, the good intentions warring fiercely with the rising panic. The giggling intensified, closer now, as if the creature was just outside. Zeke could smell it now. A cloying sweetness mixed with something ancient and foul. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of his internal struggle. He wanted to run, to hide, to escape the inevitable. But another part of him, the monstrous part, the big bad, felt a terrifying surge of anticipation. The red eyes flickered again, and a voice, thin and reedy, whispered from the darkness.
"Little piggy! Little piggy!"
Zeke squeezed his eyes shut, his massive paws covering his ears as if to block out the nightmare.
"No,"
he groaned, the sound barely audible.
"Not again."
But the voice persisted, weaving its way into his mind, a venomous tendril tightening its grip. The sweet, sickening smell grew stronger, and Zeke felt his control slipping, his resolve crumbling like dry earth. He opened his eyes, and the red eyes were gone. Relief washed over him, so potent it almost buckled his knees. Had it been a nightmare, a figment of his tormented imagination? Then something cold and wet brushed against his snout. Zeke's eyes snapped down. A small, pale face, its features twisted in a smile, was inches from his. Its eyes, wide and black, stared directly into his soul. A silent scream tore through Zeke's throat as the creature's sharp teeth glinted in the faint light, filtering through the den entrance. The last vestiges of his good intentions shattered. The big bad wolf had awakened. Chapter 1. The Dog and the Shadow. Something awful had happened in the dark woods. Zeke, who everyone whispered was the big bad wolf, was shaking, not from being cold, but from a fight inside himself. He looked at his reflection in a puddle, sharp teeth, scary eyes. He looked like a monster, and he hated it. He wanted to be good, a giant, kind wolf. But then that feeling started again. A bad pull deep inside. It was the big bad part of him, wanting to take over. He squeezed his jaw tight, trying to hold it back. He remembered the little pigs, their scared squeals. Once that sound made him feel powerful. Now it just made him feel sick inside. Suddenly, a twig snapped nearby. Zeke's head shot up. He listened hard, leaves rustling. The air felt different. It could be a deer, a rabbit, or something else, something that woke up the bad feelings. He stood still, every muscle ready. It was quiet for a long time. Then, two small red eyes glowed in the dark just outside his den. Too small for a deer. A low growl came from Zeke, a sound he couldn't stop. The red eyes blinked slowly. Then a small, creepy laugh echoed through the trees. It made Zeke feel cold all over, but not in a normal way. It was a mean laugh. Crack. A small, bony hand with sharp fingernails reached into the den. It scratched at the ground, and Zeke felt a jolt of pure fear. He jumped back. The good wolf part of him was fighting hard against the scary feeling. The laughing got louder, closer. Zeke could smell something sweet, but also rotten. His heart beat fast. He wanted to run, to hide. But the big bad part of him felt a horrible excitement. The red eyes blinked again, and a small voice whispered from the dark.
Little piggy.
Zeke squeezed his eyes shut and covered his ears. No, he whispered, but the voice went right into his head. The sweet, bad smell got stronger. Zeke felt like he was losing control. He opened his eyes. The red eyes were gone. He felt a little bit better. Maybe it was just a bad dream. Then something wet and cold touched his nose. Zeke looked down fast. A small, pale face with a creepy smile was right there. Its eyes were big and black and stared right into him. Zeke couldn't scream. The creature's sharp teeth shone in the dim light. The good wolf inside him broke. The big bad wolf was awake. Zeke ran. He had to get away from the bad feeling, away from the dark woods that felt like a trap. He ran until the trees weren't so thick anymore. He could smell something different, the sharp smell of people. He slowed down, careful. People's places could be dangerous. Then he saw a dog. It was bigger than the small, yappy dogs he sometimes saw. This dog was lying in the sun near a little house. His fur was smooth, and he looked like he ate well. He had a thick collar around his neck. He wagged his tail when a woman came out of the house and put a bowl of food in front of him. Zeke watched from the trees. He had never really thought about the animals people kept. This one looked happy. He stepped out of the trees slowly, curious. The dog looked up. His ears pointed. He didn't bark, just watched Zeke with calm eyes. Zeke came closer, but not too close.
You look happy.
Zeke rumbled, his own voice sounding strange to him. The dog tilted his head and made a soft sound.
I am happy enough,
He said gently.
This place is good. Warm when it's cold, cool when it's hot, and always food.
He pointed his nose at his empty bowl, where Zeke could still smell meat. Zeke looked at the little house. Smoke was coming from the chimney. He thought about the warmth inside, the steady food, the safety. It was so different from the woods.
You wear a strap.
Zeke said, looking at the collar.
Does it hurt?
The dog stretched and wagged his tail again.
Sometimes it reminds me I can't run free like I used to, but the people, they feed me. They take care of me. It's a fair trade.
Zeke frowned. He didn't understand trading freedom for comfort.
But you can't leave. You can't go where you want.
The dog looked a little sad.
That's true, but the dangers of the wild, always being hungry, always being scared, I don't miss that.
He looked right at Zeke.
Your eyes, they look like you know that life.
Zeke felt like the dog could see inside him. He looked away, the scary face in the den coming back to his mind. The woods were dangerous, but they were his. His freedom, even if it was hard, was all he knew.
There is a darkness in the woods.
Zeke whispered.
A hunger that changes things.
The dog's ears drooped a little.
I hear stories of bad things in the deep woods, things that aren't normal. The people are scared of them too.
A man came out of the house and called the dog's name. Buddy! The dog's ears went up, and he looked back at the house, his eyes soft.
I have to go,
Buddy said, wagging his tail.
They'll worry.
He looked at Zeke one last time, his eyes thoughtful.
Be careful in the woods, friend. Not all hunger can be filled with food.
Zeke watched as Buddy ran to the man, who knelt down to pet him. Zeke felt a strange mix of wanting that comfort and feeling uneasy about the collar. It was nice, but it wasn't freedom. With a low growl, meant for the bad feelings inside him, Zeke turned and disappeared back into the trees. Seeing Buddy and his cozy home had shown him another way to live, a way without hunger and fear. But the darkness inside him, the big bad wolf, was still there. A scary reminder of who he was afraid he would always be. The woods called him back, and with them, the scary unknown. He had to understand it, control it, or it would destroy him. So, Zeke went deeper into the green darkness, the picture of the collared dog and the warm house fading behind him. A quiet thought of a life he could never really have. Chapter 2. The Thorn and the Favor. The woods grew darker and thicker the further Zeke went. The sweet, rotten smell from the creature in his den still clung to the air, making his stomach churn. He needed to get away from it, to clear his head. He stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center, a deer lay on the ground, its leg twisted at an unnatural angle. It whined softly, its eyes wide with pain and fear. Zeke's first instinct, the old bad instinct, was to end its suffering quickly, to satisfy the gnawing emptiness within. But the image of Buddy, the dog with the collar, flashed in his mind.
Not all hunger can be filled with food,
Buddy had said. Zeke took a shaky breath and forced the urge down. He circled the deer cautiously. He could smell the blood fresh and tempting, but he focused on the deer's pained whimper. As he got closer, he saw it. A thick, sharp thorn, almost as long as his paw, was deeply embedded in the deer's leg. It looked infected, swollen, and red around the edges. Zeke had never helped another creature before. The big bad wolf didn't help. He hunted, but the thought of Buddy, of a different way, stayed with him. He lowered his head, sniffing the wound carefully. The deer flinched, but didn't try to run. Maybe it sensed Zeke's hesitation, the unusual lack of threat in his posture. Zeke knew he could probably pull the thorn out with his teeth. His jaws were strong, but one wrong move, and he could hurt the deer even more. He hesitated, the unfamiliar feeling of wanting to help battling with the ingrained instinct to harm. Then he remembered an old story his mother had told him when he was a pup, a story about a wolf and a long-necked bird. He couldn't remember all the details, but he recalled the bird helping the wolf with something stuck in its throat. A favor. Could he do a favor? Could he, the big bad wolf, help another creature without wanting something in return? He took another deep breath and nudged the deer gently with his nose, trying to communicate reassurance. Then, carefully, he positioned his teeth around the base of the thorn, making sure not to bite the deer's skin. It was awkward, his large head and powerful jaws not really meant for delicate work. He gritted his teeth, focusing all his will on being gentle. Slowly, steadily, he pulled. The deer cried out softly, but didn't struggle much. Finally, with a soft pop, the thorn came loose. Dark, thick pus oozed from the wound. Zeke backed away, panting slightly. The deer lay still for a moment, then tentatively put weight on its injured leg. It still limped, but the awful twist was gone. It looked up at Zeke, its large brown eyes filled with something he didn't recognize. Not fear. Maybe gratitude. Zeke didn't know what to do. He had never been looked at like that before. He felt a strange warmth spread through his chest, a feeling completely unlike the dark satisfaction of a hunt. He wanted to stay, to see if the deer would be all right, but the sweet rotten smell was getting stronger again, carried on a sudden breeze. The memory of the pale face in his den sent a fresh wave of unease through him. He had to go. The darkness was still out there, waiting. He gave the deer one last glance, a silent wish for its recovery. Then he turned and disappeared back into the dense undergrowth, the image of the deer's grateful eyes, a small, unexpected light in the growing shadows of his troubled mind. He didn't know why he had helped, but the feeling wasn't bad, not bad at all. But the woods felt less safe now. The memory of the creature in his den, a constant, chilling presence, urging him onward, away from any semblance of peace. Chapter 3. The Gnawing Emptiness. Days bled into nights under the oppressive canopy of the forest. The memory of the pale face, the lingering sweet rot in the air, had stolen Zeke's appetite. Every rustle of leaves sounded like the creature's approach. Every shadow seemed to writhe with its unseen presence. He hadn't hunted properly since. He couldn't even remember when. His stomach was a tight knot of emptiness, a constant, painful reminder of his neglect. His ribs were starting to show beneath his matted fur. and a dull ache throbbed behind his eyes. Thirst clawed at his throat, each breath feeling like sandpaper. The once familiar scents of the forest, damp earth, pine needles, the faint musk of prey, now seemed muted, overshadowed by the phantom stench of his fear. He stumbled through the undergrowth, his legs heavy and uncoordinated. Even the smallest tasks, like pushing through a thicket of bushes, felt like monumental efforts. The world was losing its sharp edges, blurring into a hazy landscape of hunger and paranoia. He reached a small stream, its water looking dark and uninviting in the dim light, filtering through the trees. He lapped at it weakly, the cool liquid offering only temporary relief. His body craved sustenance, real food, but the thought of hunting, of the necessary violence, felt repulsive, tainted by the darkness that clung to his thoughts. Then it started, a low whisper in the back of his mind, insidious and familiar. Weak, you are weak. It was the voice of the big bad, the cruel phantom he fought so hard to suppress. Zeke shook his head, trying to dislodge the voice. "No," he mumbled, his throat dry and scratchy.
I won't.
But the whisper grew louder, more insistent.
Look at you, skin and bones. The forest laughs at your weakness. The prey mocks your hunger.
Images flashed in his mind. Plump rabbits, unsuspecting deer, the terrified squeals of the little pigs. The old hunger, the dark satisfaction, flickered to life, a dangerous ember in the dry tinder of his starvation.
You know what you need to do.
The voice hissed, slithering into his thoughts like a venomous snake.
Take, devour. That's your nature. That is who you are.
No.
Zeke roared, the sound raw and desperate. He clawed at the ground, tearing up clumps of moss and dirt. The good wolf inside him was screaming, fighting back against the rising tide of darkness. But the big bad was relentless. It conjured images of the pale face, the black eyes, the sweet rotten smell.
They fear you. They run from you. Embrace it. Be the monster they believe you to be.
A wave of dizziness washed over Zeke. His vision swam. The trees around him seemed to twist and contort into shapes. He saw flashes of red, the color of blood, the color of the creature's eyes. He collapsed to his knees, his body racked with tremors. The two wolves inside him were locked in a brutal battle. The good wolf, weakened by hunger and fear, was struggling against the primal power of the big bad, fueled by starvation and the encroaching darkness.
Kill!
The voice shrieked, echoing in his skull.
Hunt! Feed!
Zeke's claws extended, digging into the soft earth, his teeth bared in a snarl, a sound torn from the depths of his tormented soul. He felt a terrifying surge of adrenaline, a cold, exhilarating rush that threatened to overwhelm him. The hunger was a screaming void, and the big bad offered a simple, brutal solution. He looked up, his eyes wild and unfocused. A small bird, perched on a low branch, chirped innocently. In that moment, the starving, crazed wolf saw not a creature of beauty, but a source of fleeting relief. His muscles coiled, ready to spring. The big bad had almost won. Then, a memory, faint but clear, flickered through the chaos in his mind. The deer, its leg twisted, the relief in its eyes when the thorn was gone, the strange warmth in Zeke's chest. The urge to kill the bird faltered, just for a heartbeat. That small flicker of good was enough. With a guttural cry of anguish and self-loathing, Zeke stumbled backward, away from the unsuspecting bird. He clutched his head, as if trying to physically tear the evil voice from his mind.
Get out!
He screamed into the empty forest, his voice hoarse and broken.
Leave me alone.
The whispers didn't stop, but their power seemed diminished, momentarily stunned by his resistance. Zeke knew he couldn't stay here. The hunger, the darkness, it was too strong. He needed to find something, anything, to anchor himself to the good, to escape the gnawing emptiness that threatened to consume him entirely. With a final shuddering breath, Zeke pushed himself to his feet. His body ached, his mind a battlefield. He had to leave this place, this part of the forest where the darkness felt so close. He had to find something, or someone, to help him fight the big bad before it destroyed everything, including himself. He turned and plunged deeper into the woods, a desperate, starving wolf fleeing not just hunger, but the monster within. The whispers followed, a constant, chilling reminder of the battle he was losing. Chapter 4. The Lost Lamb. Zeke stumbled through the darkening woods, driven by a desperate need to escape the echoes of the big bad wolf. The gnawing hunger had subsided slightly, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a chilling sense of isolation. He felt like a ghost, a shadow haunting his own life. He came to a small clearing, a place where the trees opened up to reveal a patch of pale, moonlit grass. In the center of the clearing, he saw a small, white figure. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a phantom conjured by his fevered mind. But as he drew closer, he realized it was real. A lamb, separated from its flock, stood alone and trembling. Its soft wool was dirty and matted, and its big dark eyes were wide with fear. It bleated weakly, a small lost sound in the vastness of the forest. Zeke froze. The sight of the lamb triggered something deep within him, a memory of the voice in his head, the hunger, the urge to take. It was so small, so defenseless, a perfect, easy meal. The big bad wolf stirred, a low growl rumbling in Zeke's chest.
Easy.
The voice whispered, seductive and cruel.
Just one bite. End the hunger. End the pain.
Zeke's claws twitched, his teeth ached. He could almost taste the lamb's warmth, the soft resistance of its flesh. The lamb took a step back, its bleating growing more frantic. But then Zeke remembered Buddy, the dog, and his gentle eyes. He remembered the deer, the feeling of helping, the unexpected warmth in his chest. He remembered the deer, who he had almost killed, and the horror he felt at his own actions. He looked at the lamb again. It was so young, so innocent. It reminded him of a time before the darkness, before the hunger, before the big bad wolf had taken hold. A wave of nausea washed over him. He couldn't do it. He wouldn't. He was not a monster. He took a deep, shuddering breath and forced himself to speak. His voice was rough and hoarse, barely a whisper.
It's okay,
he said, the words feeling clumsy and foreign in his mouth.
I won't hurt you.
The lamb didn't seem to understand. It continued to tremble, its eyes fixed on Zeke with a mixture of terror and confusion. Zeke knew he had to do something. He couldn't just leave it here, alone and afraid. The forest was too dangerous. He took a step closer, slowly, carefully. The lamb flinched, but didn't run. Zeke lowered his head, trying to appear less threatening. He remembered seeing dogs do this with smaller creatures, a sign of gentleness.
Can you walk?
He asked, again, the words feeling strange on his tongue. He knew the lamb couldn't understand him, but he hoped his tone, his posture, conveyed his intentions. The lamb took a tentative step, then another. It seemed to be favoring one leg. Zeke hesitated. He knew he couldn't carry the lamb. He was too weak, too unsteady. But he couldn't just leave it to wander alone. He looked around the clearing, his gaze searching for any sign of a path, any clue as to where the lamb might have come from. He spotted a faint trail leading into the trees, a narrow passage through the dense undergrowth. It was a risk. The trail could lead anywhere, and Zeke was in no condition to travel far. But it was better than nothing. He nudged the lamb gently with his nose, guiding it towards the trail.
This way?
He murmured, even though he knew the lamb couldn't understand.
Maybe we can find your home.
The lamb followed him, its steps slow and unsteady. Zeke walked beside it, his large frame a strange contrast to the small white creature. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. The trail was dark and overgrown, the branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of leaves made Zeke jump. But he kept going, driven by the need to protect the lamb, to guide it to safety. As they walked, Zeke felt a change within himself. The whispers of the big bad wolf grew fainter, quieter. The gnawing hunger receded, replaced by a strange sense of peace. He was still afraid, still lost, but for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows. The trail twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the forest. Zeke's strength was fading, his body aching with exhaustion. Finally, they reached a small hill. From the top, Zeke could see a faint light in the distance, a warm, flickering glow that pierced the darkness. Hope surged through him, a powerful wave that pushed back the fear and despair. He urged the lamb forward, his steps quickening despite his weariness. As they drew closer, the light resolved itself into a small cottage nestled in a clearing. A warm, inviting glow spilled from its windows, and the sound of soft voices reached their ears. Zeke stopped at the edge of the clearing, his heart pounding in his chest. He had found safety for the lamb. But what about himself? He was still the big bad wolf, a creature of darkness and fear. Would he be welcome here? He nudged the lamb gently.
Go on,
he whispered.
They'll take care of you.
The lamb hesitated, looking back at Zeke with its large, innocent eyes. Then it took a few tentative steps towards the cottage. Zeke watched as the door opened, and a woman with a kind face stepped out. She gasped when she saw the lamb, then rushed forward, her arms outstretched. The lamb bleated softly and nuzzled against her, and the woman gathered it up in her arms, her face filled with concern and relief. Zeke watched for a moment longer, a strange mix of emotions swirling within him. He was glad the lamb was safe, but a deep sadness tugged at his heart. He knew he couldn't stay. He didn't belong in the world of warmth and light. With a final lingering look at the cottage, Zeke turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest. The whispers of the big bad wolf were still there, but they seemed a little less insistent now, a little less certain. He didn't know where he was going, or what he would do, but he knew he couldn't give up. He had to keep fighting. He had to find a way to escape the darkness and become the wolf he was meant to be. The image of the lamb, safe in the woman's arms, was a small spark of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Chapter 5. The Wolf in Wool. The warmth of the cottage, the woman's kind face, the lamb's soft bleating, they faded quickly from Zeke's mind, replaced by a gnawing emptiness that went beyond hunger. It was a void in his soul, a black hole that threatened to swallow him whole. The whispers of the big bad wolf, once a distant torment, now became a deafening roar, a chorus of cruelty that echoed in his very bones. He ran, a chaotic, desperate flight through the twisted trees. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to escape the fragile hope that had flickered within him. Hope was a weakness, a vulnerability that the darkness could exploit. The big bad wolf knew this, and it reveled in Zeke's despair. Days turned into a nightmarish blur. Zeke barely registered the passage of time, the changing of the moon, the endless suffocating green of the forest. He drank from stagnant pools, his reflection a parody of the wolf he once was. Gaunt, wild-eyed, his fur matted with dirt and blood. The whispers intensified, morphing into taunts, commands.
Embrace it.
They hissed.
Give in to the hunger. Become what you are meant to be.
He tried to fight, to cling to the memory of the deer, the lamb, the fleeting moments of kindness. But the darkness was too strong, too pervasive. It had seeped into every corner of his being, corrupting his thoughts, twisting his desires. Then it happened. He found himself in a small clearing, drawn by a faint, familiar scent. A flock of sheep grazed peacefully, their soft bleating a stark contrast to the violence raging within Zeke. They were so vulnerable, so easy. The big bad wolf surged to the forefront, its power overwhelming Zeke's last shreds of resistance. His vision turned red, his muscles coiled, and a guttural snarl ripped from his throat. The sheep scattered, their bleats turning into cries of terror. But it was too late. Zeke lunged, a blur of fur and fury. He seized the nearest sheep, its warm flesh yielding easily to his powerful jaws. The taste of blood, hot and raw, filled his mouth. It was a sensation of pure, unadulterated power. The hunger, the void, was finally sated. But it wasn't enough. The big bad wolf demanded more. Zeke devoured the sheep, tearing into its flesh with savage abandon. When he was finished, nothing remained but a mangled carcass and a patch of blood-soaked grass. He stood over his kill, panting, his body trembling. But it wasn't from revulsion. It was from exhilaration. He had given in. He had embraced the darkness. He was the big bad wolf. But the whispers weren't satisfied. More, they urged.
You need to blend in. You need to deceive them.
An idea twisted and formed in Zeke's mind. He looked at the mangled remains of the sheep. Its wool, once soft and white, was now stained crimson. With a strength born of madness, Zeke began to tear the skin from the carcass. It was a gruesome, horrifying task, his claws ripping and tearing at the flesh. The sweet, rotten smell, which he now recognized as his own scent, filled his nostrils. He worked quickly, his movements driven by a dark, frenzied energy. When he was finished, he had a crude, blood-soaked pelt. He draped the sheepskin over his back, the wool clinging to his fur. It was awkward, a mockery of the innocent creature it had once belonged to, but it was also effective. He looked at his reflection in a nearby pool. The wolf staring back at him was almost unrecognizable. The sheepskin disguised his true form, softening his sharp angles, obscuring his predatory silhouette. He looked almost like one of them. A chilling grin spread across his face. The big bad wolf had found its disguise. He practiced his movements, walking with a slow, shambling gait, mimicking the docile movements of a sheep. He even tried to imitate their bleating, his voice a guttural, unsettling parody. It was perfect. He was no longer just a monster. He was a monster in disguise, a predator lurking among the flock. The ultimate deception. With a newfound sense of purpose, Zeke set off into the woods, his heart filled with a dark, twisted glee. He was the big bad wolf, and he was coming for them all. The forest, once a place of fear and torment, was now his hunting ground. And the sheep, they were his prey. He would make them pay for their weakness, for their innocence. He would show them the true meaning of terror. Chapter 6. The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Part 1. The night hung heavy over the village, a thick blanket of darkness punctuated only by the flickering glow of a few scattered lanterns. The villagers, huddled in their homes, felt a sense of unease, a prickling awareness of something unseen lurking in the shadows. They didn't know why, not yet. But the air crackled with a tension that went beyond the usual nighttime fears. A young boy named Timmy, no older than 10, was tasked with tending to the small flock of sheep kept on the edge of the village. Timmy, brave for his age, but still susceptible to the whispers of the dark, carried a lantern and a stout stick, his small heart pounding with a mixture of duty and dread. The sheep, usually docile and calm, were restless tonight, their bleating high-pitched and nervous. Timmy tried to soothe them, his voice trembling slightly, but they only huddled closer together, their eyes wide and skittish. As he moved among them, checking their pen, a rustling sound from the nearby woods made him freeze. It was a sound unlike any he had heard before, a wet, tearing sound, followed by a low, guttural growl. His blood ran cold. He raised his lantern, his hand shaking so violently that the light danced erratically, casting shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. He peered into the darkness, his eyes straining to penetrate the blackness. Then he saw it. A figure, hunched over and struggling, was half hidden in the trees. At first, Timmy thought it was a large dog, but as he got closer, a horrifying realization dawned on him. It was a wolf, but it was wearing something. Timmy's breath hitched in his throat. The wolf was pulling at something, its claws tearing at a bloody mass. As Timmy watched in frozen terror, the wolf ripped free a large piece of flesh, and Timmy realized with sickening clarity that it was the skin of a sheep. The wolf, its face contorted in a gruesome mask of concentration, was trying to put the bloody sheepskin on its own body. Timmy's mind screamed. He wanted to run, to scream, but his limbs refused to obey. He was paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. The wolf, its back to Timmy, continued its gruesome task, its movements jerky and unnatural. It pulled the skin over its head, its muffled growls echoing in the stillness of the night. Suddenly, the wolf turned. Its face, framed by the bloody, ragged edges of the sheepskin, was a vision of pure, unadulterated horror. Its eyes, glowing with a malevolent red light, locked onto Timmy's. Timmy finally found his voice, a high-pitched, terrified shriek that shattered the silence of the night. The wolf lunged. Timmy, spurred by sheer terror, finally broke free from his paralysis. He dropped his lantern, the sudden darkness plunging him into a world of shadows and fear. He scrambled backward, his stick clutched tightly in his hand, his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs. The wolf, hampered by the awkward sheepskin, was surprisingly clumsy. It stumbled over the uneven ground, its movements jerky and uncoordinated, but its eyes never left Timmy, and its growls were a promise of violence. Timmy, fueled by adrenaline, darted between the trees, his small size giving him an advantage in the dense undergrowth. The wolf crashed through the branches behind him, its heavy breathing and the snapping of twigs creating a terrifying symphony of pursuit. He could feel the wolf gaining on him, its hot breath on his heels. He stumbled, his foot catching on a root, and he fell to the ground with a thud. The wolf loomed over him, its shadow stretching out like a monstrous hand. Timmy braced himself for the end, his stick raised in a futile attempt at defense. But then, a sharp pain erupted in the wolf's leg. One of the braver sheep, in a desperate act of self-preservation, had charged the wolf, its hooves striking with surprising force. The wolf roared in pain and fury, momentarily distracted. Timmy seized his chance. He scrambled to his feet and ran, his legs pumping with a speed he never knew he possessed. He burst from the woods, gasping for breath, and stumbled into the village square. The few villagers who were still awake rushed to him, their faces etched with concern.
Wolf!
Timmy screamed, his voice hoarse and ragged.
A wolf! In the woods! It was wearing sheepskin.
His words were met with disbelief and confusion.
Wearing sheepskin? What nonsense are you talking about, boy?
But Timmy, his eyes wide with terror, insisted. He described the creature, its bloody disguise, its glowing red eyes, its unnatural movements, the spoke of the sounds, the smell of blood and rot, the sheer, unadulterated horror of the encounter. Slowly, reluctantly, the villagers began to believe him. The fear in his voice, the wildness in his eyes, was too real to be ignored. The men of the village, armed with torches, pitchforks, and hunting knives, gathered to form a search party. They were afraid, but the thought of a monstrous wolf lurking near their homes, their families, spurred them into action. They ventured into the woods, their torches casting flickering shadows that danced and swayed, turning familiar shapes into monsters. They searched for hours, their calls echoing through the darkness. But they found nothing. No wolf, no sheepskin, nothing. As dawn approached, they returned to the village, exhausted, frustrated, and angry. They had faced their fear, ventured into the darkness, and found nothing.
The boy was lying.
One of the men growled, his voice thick with disappointment and resentment.
There's no wolf. Just a scared child and his wild imagination.
The other villagers murmured in agreement, their fear turning into anger. They had been roused from their sleep, their courage tested, for nothing. They turned on Timmy, their faces hard and accusing.
You wasted our time.
One of them spat.
You made us risk our lives for a ghost.
Timmy, his body trembling, his voice barely a whisper, tried to defend himself.
But I saw it. I swear it was real. The wolf.
But his words fell on deaf ears. The villagers, their fear and anger mingling into a potent brew of resentment, refused to believe him. They wanted to forget the terror of the night, to dismiss it as a bad dream, a child's fantasy. They left Timmy standing alone in the village square, ostracized and disbelieved. He was left with the chilling certainty of what he had seen, the horrifying knowledge that a monster lurked in the shadows, waiting for its next chance to strike, and no one believed him. Chapter 7. 3 Little Pigs. The village, still reeling from the events of the previous night, tried to return to its normal rhythm. But a subtle unease lingered, a shadow cast by Timmy's frantic warnings. The adults dismissed his claims as a child's fantasy, but the children whispered among themselves, their imaginations ignited by the tale of a wolf in sheep's clothing. In a small corner of the village, nestled amongst a cluster of sturdy, well-built homes, lived the 3 little pigs, Peter, Paul, and Patricia. They were known for their industriousness and their strong sense of community. Each pig had a house suited to their personality and skills. Peter, the eldest, had a house of sturdy brick. Paul, the pragmatic middle child, lived in a house of solid wood. Patricia, the youngest and most resourceful, had a house of reinforced concrete. The 3 little pigs were aware of the villagers' fear. They had heard Timmy's story, and while they tried to remain calm, a sense of foreboding settled over their usually cheerful household. They reinforced their already strong homes, checking every lock, every window, every potential point of entry. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the village, Peter, Paul, and Patricia gathered in Patricia's concrete house. A sense of unease hung heavy in the air, thicker than the evening mist.
I don't like this,
Paul said, his voice unusually quiet.
Something feels wrong.
We've reinforced our homes,
Patricia said, trying to sound reassuring, but her voice betrayed her own anxiety.
We'll be safe.
Peter, ever the pragmatist, nodded.
We have supplies. We'll stay inside until this, whatever it is, passes.
They settled in for the night, the thick concrete walls of Patricia's house offering a small measure of comfort. They played cards, told stories, and tried to distract themselves from the growing sense of dread. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. It came from outside, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror that made their blood run cold. It was followed by a series of frantic bleats, then silence. The 3 little pigs exchanged horrified glances. Their hearts pounded in their chests, each beat a frantic drum against the silence that followed the screams.
That sounded like a sheep,
Patricia whispered, her voice trembling.
And someone screaming,
Paul added, his face pale. Peter, his face grim, stood up.
We have to see what's happening.
Are you crazy?
Patricia hissed.
We'll be safe if we stay here.
We can't just stay here and do nothing.
Peter said, his voice firm despite his own fear.
If someone is in trouble...
He grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, his hand trembling slightly. Paul picked up a sturdy wooden chair, and Patricia, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and determination, grabbed a large, sharpened concrete fragment. They opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking in the silence. The night air was thick with the smell of something metallic and acrid, something that made their stomachs churn. They stepped out into the darkness, their makeshift weapons held tightly in their hands. The village, usually quiet and peaceful, was now a scene of utter horror. The small flock of sheep that had been kept in a nearby pen was gone. The pen itself was a scene of carnage, the wooden fence splintered and broken, the ground soaked with blood. A trail of blood led away from the pen, disappearing into the darkness beyond.
Oh no!
Paul whispered, his voice choked with horror.
He took them,
Patricia said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage.
He took the sheep.
As they followed the trail of blood, the sounds of their own footsteps echoed in the silence, each one a hammer blow to their already frayed nerves. The trail led them to the edge of the woods, the same woods where Timmy had seen the wolf. The trees loomed over them, their branches twisted and gnarled like skeletal fingers. The darkness seemed to press in on them, suffocating and malevolent. Suddenly, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the distance. The three little pigs froze, their hearts leaping into their throats. The red eyes blinked slowly, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the trees, a sound that chilled them to the bone. The creature stepped out of the shadows. It was the wolf. He was even more terrifying than Timmy had described. The sheepskin was stretched taut across his massive frame, stained and dripping with blood. His teeth, long and sharp, glistened in the moonlight. His eyes burned with a malevolent hunger. He held a struggling, bleating sheep in his jaws. The three little pigs stared in horror, their courage faltering. This was no ordinary wolf. This was a monster. The wolf looked at them, his red eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. He dropped the sheep, which lay still and lifeless on the ground. The wolf lunged, a parody of a predator, the bloody sheepskin clinging to his massive frame. The three little pigs, frozen for a heartbeat, finally reacted. Peter, wielding the iron poker, charged forward with a desperate cry. The wolf swatted him aside with a powerful swipe of his paw. The poker clattered to the ground, and Peter was sent flying, crashing into a tree with a sickening thud. He slumped to the ground, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Paul, his face pale but determined, threw the wooden chair at the wolf. It struck the beast's side, momentarily staggering him. But the wolf recovered quickly, his red eyes blazing with fury. He turned his attention to Paul, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Paul, realizing his weapon was useless, tried to back away. But the wolf was too fast. He lunged again, his sharp teeth sinking into Paul's leg. Paul screamed, a high-pitched, agonized sound that echoed through the clearing. He fell to the ground, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Patricia, the youngest, watched in horror as her brothers fell. Tears streamed down her face, but she held her ground, clutching the sharpened concrete fragment. She knew she was outmatched, but she couldn't run. She had to try. The wolf, his attention now fully on Patricia, stalked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate, like a cat toying with its prey. He seemed to relish her fear, the way her small body trembled, the desperate glint in her eyes.
Please,
Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible.
please don't hurt me.
The wolf chuckled, a low, guttural sound that was more animal than human.
Hurt you?
He seemed to say with his eyes.
I'm going to devour you.
Patricia lunged, her small body propelled by a surge of adrenaline. She threw the concrete fragment with all her might, aiming for the wolf's eyes. The wolf snarled and swatted the fragment away, his movements impossibly fast. The fragment grazed his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. The wolf roared in pain and fury. He grabbed Patricia with his massive jaws. Patricia screamed, her voice cut short as the wolf's teeth closed around her. The sound was sickening, a wet crunch that echoed in the clearing. Then, silence. The wolf stood over Patricia's unmoving body, his chest heaving, his face and the sheepskin mask dripping with blood. He had killed them all. Peter, Paul, and Patricia, the 3 little pigs, lay dead, their lives extinguished in a brutal, senseless act of violence. He looked around the clearing, his red eyes scanning the scene of carnage. A twisted satisfaction filled him, a dark sense of completion. He had proven his power. He was the big bad wolf, the terror of the forest, and nothing could stand in his way. But a flicker of something else, something cold and calculating, crossed his mind. He couldn't stay here. The villagers would come. They would hunt him down. He turned and disappeared into the darkness of the woods, his movements swift and silent despite the cumbersome sheepskin. He left behind a scene of unspeakable horror, a gruesome testament to his brutality. The clearing was silent, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the night breeze. The bodies of the 3 little pigs lay still and broken, their dreams of safety and security shattered. The scent of blood hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder of the evil that had visited their small corner of the world. The big bad wolf had escaped, leaving behind a trail of death and despair, and the village, already on edge, was now plunged into a nightmare they could never have imagined. Chapter 8. The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Part 2. The morning after the massacre was a somber tone. The villagers, already on edge, awoke to a chilling scene. The news spread quickly, carried on horrified whispers. The 3 little pigs, Peter, Paul, and Patricia, were dead. Their homes, once symbols of safety and security, now stood as silent, gruesome monuments to the wolf's brutality. Timmy, the boy who had cried wolf, emerged from his home, his face pale and drawn. He had heard the screams the night before, the chilling silence that followed. He knew, with a sickening certainty, what had happened. He rushed into the village square, where a crowd had gathered, their faces a mixture of grief, fear, and disbelief. The air was thick with a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional sob. Timmy, fueled by a desperate need to be believed, to have his truth acknowledged, pushed his way through the crowd.
I told you so,
he exclaimed, his voice cracking with a strange mix of sorrow and vindication.
I told you there was a wolf. I told you he was dangerous.
The villagers turned to him, their faces hardening. They were grieving, they were terrified, and they were looking for someone to blame. Timmy, with his frantic pronouncements, his "I told you so's," became an easy target.
The boy is hysterical,
one of the men said, his voice rough with anger.
He's trying to make this about himself.
He's always been a liar.
Another woman added, her eyes filled with suspicion.
Why should we believe him now?
But Timmy persisted, his voice rising in desperation.
It was the wolf. The same one I saw. He was wearing a sheepskin. I saw him. He killed them.
As if to confirm his words, a messenger rushed into the square, his face pale and his voice trembling.
It's true.
He gasped.
The 3 little pigs, they're dead. It was a wolf. A monstrous wolf.
A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The reality of Timmy's words, the horror of the wolf's actions, finally sank in. They could no longer dismiss him as a liar, a hysterical child. The evidence was undeniable, brutal, and heartbreaking. Timmy, emboldened by the messenger's confirmation, seized the moment. "I told you so," he repeated, his voice louder now, tinged with a dangerous edge of triumph.
I told you I saw him. I told you he was real.
He saw their faces change, the disbelief morphing into a grudging acceptance. But instead of relief, he saw anger. Anger directed at him.
You knew?
A villager accused, his voice low and menacing.
You knew there was a monster out there, and you didn't do enough to convince us.
We could have been prepared.
Another added, his eyes filled with grief and rage.
If you had been more convincing, maybe they would still be alive.
Timmy, sensing the shift in the crowd's mood, saw an opportunity. A dangerous, reckless idea formed in his mind.
I'll prove it to you,
he declared, his voice ringing with a false bravado.
I'll lead you to him. I'll show you the wolf.
The villagers stared at him, their faces a mixture of skepticism and a desperate, burning desire for revenge.
And if you're lying?
One of them challenged. Timmy shrugged, a cold, calculating glint in his eyes.
If I'm lying, you can do whatever you want to me. But if I'm telling the truth, you pay me a reward for leading you to the monster.
A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. They were desperate for justice, for revenge, and the promise of a reward, of finally ridding themselves of the terror that stalked their village, was too tempting to resist. They agreed to Timmy's bet. A hefty sum of money, enough to set him up for life, would be his if he led them to the wolf. But if he failed... The villagers, armed with whatever weapons they could find, followed Timmy into the woods. He led them on a wild goose chase, his knowledge of the forest and his desperate desire for the reward driving him forward. But the wolf was gone, vanished, without a trace. Hours turned into days, and the search yielded nothing. The villagers, exhausted, frustrated, and consumed by grief, turned their anger on Timmy. They had been tricked, they had been led on a fool's errand, and they had lost precious time that could have been spent mourning their dead and protecting their homes. The consequences were swift and brutal. The villagers, fueled by their rage and grief, turned on Timmy with a ferocity that matched the wolf's. They beat him, they whipped him, they dragged him through the mud. They stripped him of his clothes, leaving him battered and broken. They didn't kill him, but they left him a shell of his former self, a living testament to their cruelty and their desire for a scapegoat. He was left alone in the woods, the same woods he had claimed held a monster, to suffer and to reflect on his arrogance. The villagers returned to their homes, their grief and anger still simmering beneath the surface. They had not found the wolf, but they had found someone to punish, and in their twisted sense of justice, they felt a small measure of satisfaction. The real monster was still out there. Chapter 9. Greatest of all time. The wolf, his hunger sated for now, moved deeper into the forest, the sheepskin clinging to his fur. He was injured, slowed by the brave sheep and the villagers' futile chase, but his bloodlust remained undiminished. The whispers in his mind urged him onward, promising more. More power, more control, more victims. He emerged from the dense woods into a more open area, a rolling hillside dotted with small, isolated cottages. The moon cast long, eerie shadows, turning the landscape into a macabre tableau. The wolf's red eyes scanned the area, searching for any sign of life, any flicker of warmth. He caught a scent on the wind, a delicate, almost sweet aroma, mixed with the earthy smell of livestock. His ears perked up, catching the faint sound of singing. He crept closer, his movements silent and fluid despite his injuries. The singing grew louder, a chorus of high-pitched voices, innocent and cheerful. It was coming from one of the cottages, a small, brightly lit dwelling nestled in a hollow. The wolf peered through a window, his breath fogging the glass. Inside, he saw a group of children. No, not children. Goats, 7 young goats, gathered around a table, singing a simple folk song. They were unguarded, vulnerable, their naivete a stark contrast to the darkness that stalked outside. A cruel smile twisted the wolf's face. It was almost too easy. He remembered a story, a tale whispered among wolves, of a mother goat and her 7 kids, a foolish mother, and even more foolish children. He had always dismissed it as a simple cautionary tale, a way to teach pups to be wary of tricks. But now he saw the potential. He circled the cottage, his mind racing. He couldn't just barge in. Not this time. He needed a plan, a way to deceive them, to lure them out of their safe haven. The sheepskin, he realized, was his key. He adjusted the garment, pulling it tighter around his frame. He practiced his movements, trying to mimic the gentle sway of a sheep. He even tried to imitate the goats singing, his voice a low, guttural mockery of their innocent melody. It was a challenge, but the big bad wolf was patient. He was cunning, and he was hungry. He approached the cottage door, his heart pounding with a dark anticipation. He took a deep breath, forcing his voice into a higher, more melodic register.
Little ones,
he called out, his voice a chillingly accurate imitation of a mother's gentle tone.
It's me, your mother. Open the door.
Inside, the singing stopped. The 7 goats looked at each other, their eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and joy.
Mother!
The smallest goat exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement.
She's back!
But she left so early.
Another goat said, a hint of suspicion in his voice.
Nonsense.
A third goat chimed in.
It's Mother. Open the door.
One of the older goats, a sensible young female named Greta, hesitated. Wait, she said.
Let me see your paw under the door.
The wolf froze. He hadn't anticipated this. His large, clawed paw would give him away instantly. He quickly scanned his surroundings, his eyes landing on a patch of mud. An idea, dark and desperate, formed in his mind. He plunged his paw into the mud, coating it in a thick layer of grime. It was a crude disguise, but it might be enough. He limped back to the door, his movements stiff and awkward. He pushed his mud-caked paw under the door, wincing at the pain. He said, his voice still a chillingly accurate imitation.
It's me. Now open the door, my little ones. I have brought you treats.
Greta peered at the paw, her brow furrowed. It was dirty and large, but it was the right shape.
Her voice sounds a little different,
she whispered to her siblings.
Don't be silly, Greta,
one of the younger goats said impatiently.
You're always so suspicious.
The goats crowded around the door, their initial caution overridden by their desire for their mother's return. They pushed and shoved, their small bodies trembling with excitement. "Open it!" they cried. "Open the door!" Greta, still hesitant, stepped back as her siblings fumbled with the latch. She had a bad feeling about this, a sense of dread that she couldn't explain. The door creaked open. The wolf stood in the doorway, the sheepskin a frame around his monstrous form. His red eyes gleamed in the dim light, and his sharp teeth were born in a predatory grin. The 7 goats froze, their joy turning into screams of terror. The wolf lunged. The cottage, once a haven of warmth and song, transformed into a scene of unimaginable terror. The 7 goats, their innocent excitement turning to screams of pure horror, scattered in a desperate attempt to escape. But the wolf was too fast, too strong, his movements a blur of violence and fury. He snatched the smallest goat first, a tiny kid named Pip, who hadn't even had time to turn. The wolf's jaws closed around Pip's fragile neck, the sound a sickening crunch that silenced his terrified squeak. The other goats watched in frozen horror as Pip's small body went limp, his wide eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The wolf tossed Pip aside like a discarded toy, a dark stain spreading on the once bright floorboards. A jolt of adrenaline coursed through the remaining 6 goats. Greta, remembering her mother's warnings, tried to rally her siblings.
Run!
She cried, her voice trembling.
Get to the attic, quickly!
3 of the younger goats, spurred by her command, scrambled towards a small set of stairs leading to the attic. The wolf, his bloodlust ignited, stalked after them. The first goat to reach the stairs, a playful kid named Finn, was caught by the wolf's outstretched paw. The claws, sharp and deadly, raked across Finn's back, tearing through his soft fur and flesh. Finn screamed, a high-pitched wail that echoed in the confined space. The wolf dragged Finn back down the stairs, his struggles feeble against the beast's immense strength. With a sickening twist, the wolf broke Finn's neck, his body going limp like a broken doll. The other 2 goats, witnessing their brother's gruesome demise, froze on the stairs, paralyzed by fear. The wolf, his eyes glowing with sadistic pleasure, turned his attention to them. He stalked up the stairs slowly, deliberately, relishing their terror. The first goat, a timid kid named Lily, tried to squeeze past her brother, a slightly braver goat named Tom. But they were trapped, their small bodies blocking each other's escape. The wolf reached them, his shadow looming over them like a death shroud. He grabbed Lily by the scruff of her neck, lifting her into the air. Lily kicked and struggled, her small hooves flailing helplessly. The wolf opened his maw wide and with a swift, brutal motion, bit her in half. Tom screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and grief. He tried to scramble past his sister's bisected body, but the wolf was too quick. He grabbed Tom by the leg, the sharp claws digging into his flesh. Tom cried out in pain, his leg snapping under the pressure. The wolf dragged Tom back down the stairs, leaving a trail of blood on the wooden steps. He threw Tom to the ground and then stomped on his head. Meanwhile, back in the main room, Greta and the two remaining goats, a pair of twins named Rose and Thorn, tried to barricade themselves behind the overturned table. Their small bodies trembled as they pushed against the heavy furniture, their eyes darting nervously towards the stairs. The wolf, having finished with the goats on the stairs, turned his attention back to the main room. He watched them struggle with amusement, his head cocked to the side. He let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards, making the twins jump. Rose, the braver of the twins, grabbed a small ceramic statue from the table and threw it at the wolf. It shattered against his head, momentarily stunning him. But the wolf quickly recovered, his eyes blazing with renewed fury. He charged towards the table, his massive body crashing through it like a battering ram. The table splintered into pieces, sending Rose and Thorn flying. Thorn landed hard, his arm twisted at an odd angle. He cried out in pain, his voice weak and trembling. The wolf stalked towards him, his shadow falling over the injured goat. He grabbed Thorn by the throat, his claws digging into his soft fur. Thorn gagged and choked, his small body convulsing in the wolf's grip. The wolf lifted Thorn high into the air, his red eyes meeting Thorn's terrified gaze. Then, with a sickening snap, he crushed his windpipe. Rose, the last goat standing, watched in horror as her twin brother died. She knew she was next. She scrambled backward, her hooves slipping on the blood-soaked floor. She backed into a corner, her body pressed against the cold, hard wall. The wolf approached her slowly, deliberately, savoring her fear. He loomed over her, his massive frame blocking out the light. Rose looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears and terror. She saw the monster in his eyes, the pure, unadulterated evil that resided within. The wolf opened his maw wide, his sharp teeth glistening in the dim light. Rose closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. The wolf bit her in half. Chapter 10. The Boy Who Cried Wolf, Part 3. The village, still smoldering with the aftermath of the wolf's attack on the 7 young goats, was about to receive a visitor. News had spread like wildfire, ironically, as it would turn out, that Little Red Riding Hood, the beloved celebrity known for her bright red cloak and even brighter personality, was coming to visit her grandmother. The villagers, despite their grief and fear, were momentarily distracted by the prospect of this visit. It was a chance for a brief respite, a glimmer of light in the encroaching darkness. Red Riding Hood was scheduled to arrive in 3 days. Without knowing, the big bad wolf was already among them, a shadow lurking in the ruins. He moved through the village like a phantom, his red eyes surveying the destruction he had wrought. The thrill of the hunt, the taste of blood, had awakened a primal hunger within him, a hunger that could not be easily sated. Under the cover of darkness, the wolf embarked on a new, even more sinister plan. He moved from house to house, his keen sense of smell guiding him. He found containers of flammable liquid, kerosene, gasoline, stored for lamps and tools. With a methodical precision that belied his bestial nature, he poured the liquid, creating a network of invisible, deadly paths. The scent of the accelerant hung heavy in the air, a silent promise of destruction. The night he set the fires was a night of chaos and terror. Flames erupted simultaneously across the village, leaping from house to house with terrifying speed. The villagers, roused from their sleep, stumbled into the streets, their screams mingling with the roar of the inferno. The once familiar landscape was transformed into a hellish landscape of fire and smoke. Timmy, still recovering from the villagers' brutal punishment, found himself trapped in the heart of the inferno. His body ached, his face was scarred, and his spirit was broken. But he was alive. He coughed, his lungs burning with a thick, acrid smoke, his eyes stinging from the intense heat. He stumbled through the burning streets, disoriented and terrified, desperately searching for a way out. He saw him then, the big, bad wolf. The wolf stood amidst the flames, his silhouette outlined against the inferno, his red eyes glowing with malevolent satisfaction. He seemed to be enjoying the chaos, the destruction, the sheer terror of the scene. Timmy, his voice raw and trembling, croaked out,
You did this?
The wolf turned his head slowly, his gaze locking on to Timmy. A cruel smile twisted his lips, revealing his sharp, blood-stained teeth.
The boy who cried wolf,
he rumbled, his voice a guttural growl that resonated with dark amusement.
You caused them so much trouble, all that running around, all that searching, because of you.
Timmy, remembering the villagers' brutal treatment, his voice filled with bitterness, retorted,
They deserved it. They didn't believe me. They hurt me. They left me to die.
The wolf tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with cold indifference.
They were fools, but you are just a meal.
The wolf lunged. Timmy, fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline, dodged the attack, his body screaming in pain. He scrambled backward, his hand finding a piece of jagged debris. He swung it wildly, connecting with the wolf's shoulder. The wolf roared in pain, his thick fur absorbing some of the impact, but the force still staggered him. He turned on Timmy, his eyes blazing with fury. The fight was brutal and desperate. Timmy, weak and injured, fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal. He dodged, he weaved, he struck with whatever he could find, his movements clumsy, but filled with a savage determination. The wolf, despite his injuries, was stronger, faster. He cornered Timmy against a burning wall, the flames licking at his back. The wolf grabbed Timmy by the throat, his claws digging into his flesh. Timmy gasped for breath, his vision blurring. He clawed at the wolf's face, his nails tearing at the rough fur. The wolf roared in pain, his grip tightening. He opened his maw wide, his hot breath smelling of blood and ash. Timmy saw his own reflection in the wolf's red eyes, a small, terrified figure about to be consumed. The wolf bit down. The sound was sickening, a wet crunch that was quickly swallowed by the roar of the flames. Timmy's struggles ceased, his body going limp in the wolf's grasp. The wolf swallowed, his throat working. A trickle of blood ran down his chin, mingling with the soot and ash. He dropped Timmy's mangled remains into the fire, the flames quickly engulfing the small, broken body. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as the firefighters and police arrived. The firefighters battled the blaze, their hoses spraying jets of water into the inferno. The police, their faces grim, began to search the area, their flashlights cutting through the smoke and darkness. The wolf, his senses heightened, slipped away, moving through the chaos like a shadow. He found refuge in a burnt-out house, a structure that had already been partially extinguished. Inside, he found a gruesome scene. 2 charred bodies, a man and a woman, lying huddled together, and beside them, the small, lifeless form of a dog. The dog, Buddy. The wolf stared at the dog's lifeless eyes, a flicker of something akin to regret, crossing his mind. But it was quickly extinguished by the overwhelming hunger that gnawed at his insides. The firefighters confirmed that the fires were contained, the inferno reduced to smoldering ruins. Only 3 houses were completely destroyed, but the damage was extensive. The police reported 1 confirmed death, Timmy. 2 people were missing, presumed dead. The wolf, hidden in the burnt-out house, listened to their reports, his stomach full, his mind calculating his next move. He had enough food to last him for a couple of days. 2 days later, under the cover of darkness, the wolf emerged from his hiding place. The burnt-out house offered no comfort, only the stench of death and the haunting memory of the dog's lifeless form. He moved through the ruined village, his silhouette a dark omen against the smoldering embers. As he reached the outskirts of the village, he saw her, an old woman, walking slowly down the street, her back hunched, her steps unsteady. She seemed oblivious to the destruction, to the danger that lurked in the shadows. The wolf watched her, his red eyes gleaming. He could easily kill her, end her life in an instant. But something stayed his hand. The old woman stopped, her gaze fixed on the wolf. She didn't scream, didn't run. Instead, she spoke, her voice surprisingly strong and clear.
Poor thing,
she said, her voice filled with a strange mixture of pity and affection.
You look so lost, so alone. Come here, my dear. Let an old woman take care of you.
Chapter 11. Grandma's Giant Good Wolf. The wolf hesitated, his red eyes narrowed. The old woman's words were unexpected. He had expected fear, revulsion, a desperate attempt to flee, not this strange, unsettling offer of care. He took a tentative step towards her, his massive frame still imposing, despite his weariness. The sheepskin, now more of a shroud than a disguise, rustled with his movement. The scent of blood and ash clung to him, a stark reminder of his recent violence. The old woman didn't flinch. She simply smiled, a gentle, almost serene expression that seemed utterly out of place amidst the charred ruins of the village. Her eyes, though aged, were sharp and knowing, as if she could see past the monstrous exterior to something else.
Come, come,
she beckoned, her voice soft but firm.
You look exhausted. My home is not far. You can rest there, and I can give you something to eat.
The wolf, driven by a primal weariness that transcended his hunger, found himself drawn to her. There was a strange power in her voice, a sense of ancient wisdom, and an almost hypnotic calm. He couldn't explain it, but he felt compelled to obey. He followed her as she turned and began to walk, her steps slow but steady. The wolf, despite his size, moved with a surprising gentleness, as if afraid to startle her. They walked in silence, the only sound the soft crunch of their footsteps on the debris-strewn path. The old woman's cottage was small and unassuming, a stark contrast to the devastation that surrounded it. It had somehow survived the fire, standing like a lonely beacon of normalcy in the heart of the destruction. Inside, it was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of herbs and something sweet baking in the oven. The old woman settled the wolf in a corner, providing him with a thick, woven blanket. He lay down gratefully, his injured muscles finally allowed to relax. She brought him a bowl of stew, the aroma rich and savory. He ate it slowly, cautiously, his eyes never leaving her. Over the next 2 days, an unsettling routine developed. The old woman tended to the wolf's wounds, cleaning them with gentle hands and applying strange-smelling salves. She spoke to him in a soothing voice, telling him stories of the village, of the people who had lived there, of the little girl who was coming to visit. The wolf listened, his red eyes fixed on her face. He didn't understand everything she said, but he sensed a deep sadness in her voice, a profound loneliness that resonated with his own. He found himself drawn to her. He, the big bad wolf, the terror of the forest, was finding solace in the company of an old woman. He learned her name was Abigail. She spoke of her granddaughter with a fierce love, describing her bright red cloak, her infectious laughter, her unwavering kindness. She called her Red, and her voice softened whenever she spoke of her. On the second evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the small cottage, Abigail sat beside the wolf, stroking his thick fur with her gnarled hand.
She'll be here tomorrow,
Abigail said, her voice filled with a bittersweet anticipation.
My Red will be here.
The wolf shifted, his ears twitching. Red. The word triggered something in his memory, a faint echo of the woman's voice in the village, the hushed whispers of the children. Abigail smiled, her eyes gleaming in the dim light.
She's bringing me a basket, you see, filled with all sorts of treats, just like she always does.
The wolf tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. A basket, a red cloak. It couldn't be. Abigail's smile widened, taking on a strange, almost predatory quality. Her voice dropped, becoming low and husky, the gentle cadence replaced by something else.
You know,
she said, her gaze fixed on the wolf, her eyes burning with an unholy light.
It's been so long since I've had a proper visitor, someone to share a meal with.
The wolf recoiled, his instincts screaming danger. The old woman's demeanor had shifted, the gentle kindness replaced by something ancient, something dark, something utterly terrifying. He tried to stand, to back away, but Abigail's hand tightened on his fur, her grip surprisingly strong.
Don't go,
she whispered, her voice a chilling caress.
Stay, and be here tomorrow, for Red.
The wolf stared at her, his mind reeling. The truth, horrifying and undeniable, crashed down upon him. This wasn't just an old woman. This was Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother, and she was not what she seemed. The revelation hit the wolf like a physical blow. Abigail, the seemingly frail old woman, was Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother. and she was not offering him kindness. She was something else. Something ancient, something malevolent, something that made the big bad wolf, the terror of the forest, feel a flicker of genuine fear. He tried to pull away, his instincts screaming at him to flee, but Abigail's grip on his fur tightened, her strength unnatural, her smile widening into a parody of a loving grandmother.
Tomorrow,
she repeated, her voice a chilling caress.
tomorrow we shall have a feast, you, me, and my sweet Red.
The wolf knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was trapped. He was in the lair of a predator far more cunning and far more dangerous than himself. He had walked into her trap, lured by a twisted sense of comfort and a desperate need for rest. His mind raced, searching for a way out. He couldn't overpower her, not in his weakened state. He needed a plan, a way to turn the tables, to become the hunter once more. He forced himself to relax, to feign submission. He lowered his head, his red eyes narrowed, pretending to succumb to her unnatural charm. He would bide his time, wait for an opportunity, and then strike. Over the next day, the tension in the cottage thickened, becoming almost palpable. Abigail moved with a strange energy, her movements quick and precise, her smile never reaching her eyes. She prepared for Red Riding Hood's arrival, setting the table with a disturbing care, her gnarled hands polishing silverware that gleamed with an unsettling sharpness. The wolf watched her every move, his mind churning, formulating a plan. He knew he had to act quickly before Red Riding Hood arrived. He couldn't let her fall into this thing's clutches. As Abigail busied herself in the kitchen, her back turned to him. The wolf saw his chance. He rose silently, his massive frame moving with a surprising agility. His gaze fell upon a heavy cast-iron skillet hanging on the wall. It was the perfect weapon. He crept towards her, his paws making no sound on the wooden floor. Abigail hummed softly to herself, her movements rhythmic and hypnotic. She seemed utterly unaware of the danger that stalked behind her. The wolf raised the skillet high above his head, his muscles coiled, his heart pounding in his chest. He had killed before, brutally, savagely, but this felt different. This was a fight for survival, a desperate attempt to escape a nightmare. He brought the skillet down with a deafening crash. Abigail gasped, her body convulsing under the force of the blow. Her humming stopped abruptly, replaced by a wet, gurgling sound. She slumped to the floor, her head twisted at an unnatural angle, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The wolf stood over her, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. He had killed her. But the horror of the act, the sheer brutality of it, washed over him in a wave of nausea. He dropped the skillet, its heavy thud echoing in the silence. He stared at Abigail's lifeless body, his mind reeling. He had killed a human, a frail old woman, in cold blood. What had he become? But there was no time for remorse. Red Riding Hood would be here soon. He had to act quickly. He looked at Abigail's body, his gaze lingering on her clothes, her skin. An idea twisted and formed in his mind. It was insane, a desperate gamble, but it was his only chance. With a strength born of desperation, the wolf began the gruesome task. He carefully, meticulously removed Abigail's clothing, his paws trembling as he worked. He peeled away her garments, laying them out on the floor beside her. Then, with a deep breath, he began to to remove her skin. It was a horrifying, painstaking process. He used his claws, his teeth, his brute strength to separate the flesh from the bone. The cottage was filled with the wet, sickening sounds of tearing and ripping, the air thick with the smell of blood and death. He worked for what seemed like an eternity, his body slick with sweat, his mind numb with revulsion. Finally, he was finished. He stood over Abigail's mutilated corpse, the bloody, skinless form a tableau. Beside it lay her clothes, and the skin, a gruesome, fleshy garment. With a trembling hand, the wolf picked up the skin. It was still warm, still pliable. He hesitated for a moment, his stomach churning, his sanity stretched to its breaking point. Then, with a desperate, animalistic cry, he began to put it on. Chapter 12. Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf, now an imitation of Abigail, stood in the doorway, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and a twisted anticipation. The old woman's skin clung to him, a bloody, ill-fitting suit, the stench of death masked barely by the faint scent of lavender that still clung to the fabric. He had managed to pull on her clothes, the familiar dress and shawl feeling alien and repulsive against his fur. He had arranged himself in Abigail's bed, pulling the covers up to his chin, his red eyes peering out from beneath the frilled bonnet. He knew it was a desperate, insane charade, but it was all he had. He heard the sound of footsteps outside, light and quick, accompanied by the cheerful lilt of a familiar melody. Red Riding Hood. His muscles tensed. He tried to control his breathing, to mimic the slow, shallow breaths of an elderly woman. He forced a smile, a contortion of the borrowed face. The door creaked open, and Little Red Riding Hood stepped inside. She was even more beautiful than her images suggested. Her red cloak, a vibrant splash of color against the drab backdrop of the ruined village, flowed behind her as she moved. Her eyes, bright and full of life, sparkled with concern as she took in the cottage.
Grandma?
She called out, her voice melodic and clear.
I'm here. I brought you the basket.
The wolf, his throat tight with revulsion and a strange, morbid curiosity, managed a weak.
Come in, my dear.
The voice was a distorted, chillingly inaccurate imitation of Abigail's. Red Riding Hood approached the bed, her smile faltering slightly as she looked at the figure huddled beneath the covers.
Grandma?
You don't look well. Are you feeling all right? The wolf, his borrowed face twitching, forced another smile.
Just a little tired, my sweet. Come closer. Let me see my beautiful red.
Red Riding Hood hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing her face. She stepped closer to the bed, her hand clutching the basket, her bright eyes scanning the room. The air felt heavy, oppressive. It smelled faintly of something metallic, something wrong.
You sound different, Grandma.
She said, her voice small.
And your hands. They look so large.
The wolf's heart pounded. He tried to keep his voice steady, to maintain the charade.
The better to hold you with, my dear.
He croaked, the words sounding and menacing, even to his own ears. Red Riding Hood recoiled slightly, her eyes widening with a growing suspicion.
Grandma, what's wrong with you? Your eyes, they're red.
The wolf chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down Red Riding Hood's spine.
The better to see you with,
he rasped, the words echoing the old, terrifying tale, but twisted, corrupted, made real. Red Riding Hood took a step back, her hand reaching into her basket. It wasn't filled with treats, as the story suggested. It held something else, something sharp, something deadly.
What's that in your basket, Red?
The wolf asked, his voice a low growl. Red Riding Hood's eyes hardened. She wasn't the innocent little girl of the stories. She was a survivor, a warrior, a celebrity who had faced down danger and emerged victorious. She knew this wasn't her grandmother. This was a monster.
Something to protect myself with,
she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. She pulled out a large, gleaming hunting knife, its blade catching the dim light. The wolf's smile widened, revealing his sharp, blood-stained teeth.
"Ah, Red,"
he said, his voice a low, menacing purr.
"You're not so little anymore, are you? And you know the story."
He lunged. Red Riding Hood was ready. She sidestepped the attack with surprising agility, her knife flashing in the air. She slashed at the wolf, aiming for his throat. The wolf roared in pain, his borrowed skin tearing, revealing the thick fur beneath. He staggered back, his red eyes burning with fury. The fight was on. Red Riding Hood, despite her small stature, fought with a ferocity that surprised the wolf. She was quick, agile, her movements precise and deadly. She knew how to use the knife, her training evident in every thrust and parry. The wolf, hampered by the ill-fitting skin and his own injuries, fought with a savage desperation. He swiped at her with his claws, his teeth snapping, his growls filling the small cottage. The room became a whirlwind of violence, a chaotic dance of predator and prey. Furniture was overturned, the air filled with the stench of blood, and the sounds of grunts, growls, and the clash of steel against flesh. Red Riding Hood managed to land several blows, her knife tearing through the wolf's borrowed skin, revealing glimpses of the monstrous form beneath. But the wolf was relentless, his strength overwhelming. He grabbed Red Riding Hood by the arm, his grip like iron. He threw her against the wall, the impact knocking the breath out of her. Red Riding Hood gasped, her vision blurring. The wolf loomed over her, his shadow filling her vision. He raised a clawed hand, ready to deliver the final blow. But at the last moment, his strike went wide. Red Riding Hood, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, twisted her body, narrowly avoiding the deadly claws. She scrambled away, her back scraping against the rough wall, and darted into the shadows of the cottage. The wolf roared in frustration, his red eyes scanning the dim interior. He had her cornered, he thought, but she had slipped away like a phantom. The thrill of the hunt, momentarily subdued by the heat of the battle, surged back with renewed intensity. He would find her. He would kill her. He would devour her. He stalked forward, his heavy steps shaking the already unstable structure. The cottage, once a place of warmth and comfort, was now a labyrinth of shadows and fear. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the tattered curtains sounded like a death knell. The wolf entered the main room, his senses heightened. He could smell her fear, a faint metallic tang in the air. He could hear her breathing, shallow and rapid, somewhere in the darkness. He swept his gaze across the room, his eyes glinting in the dim light. overturned furniture, shattered dishes, and the lingering scent of blood painted a gruesome tableau. He moved towards the hallway, his claws clicking on the wooden floor. He paused at the entrance, his massive head turning from side to side, sniffing the air. The hallway was narrow and dark, a series of closed doors leading to unknown horrors. He chose the first door on the left. He kicked it open, the splintering wood echoing through the cottage. The room beyond was small and cluttered, filled with the remnants of a life abruptly interrupted. A rocking chair swayed gently, as if recently vacated. A half-finished knitting project lay on a small table. Red Riding Hood was not there. The wolf growled, his frustration mounting. He moved to the next room, his movements becoming more frantic. He threw open the door, his claws scraping against the wood. This room was a bedroom, with a large four-poster bed dominating the space. The bed was disheveled, the covers twisted and stained. He saw a flicker of movement beneath the bed. He lunged, his claws reaching under the frame, tearing at the fabric of the bedskirt. Red Riding Hood screamed, her hiding place discovered. She scrambled out from under the bed, her knife held defensively in front of her. The wolf roared in triumph, his teeth snapping. He swiped at her, but Red Riding Hood was quick. She dodged his attack and darted out of the room, back into the hallway. The hunt continued. The wolf stalked her through the cottage, room by room, his movements a terrifying combination of predator and wounded beast. He smashed through doors, overturned furniture, his rage growing with each near miss. Red Riding Hood, her heart pounding, her body aching, used her agility and knowledge of the cottage to her advantage. She slipped through narrow spaces, hid behind overturned furniture, her red cloak a fleeting glimpse of color in the shadows. She knew she couldn't outrun him forever. She needed a plan. She needed a weapon. Her eyes scanned the chaotic surroundings, searching for anything that could help her. The wolf's heavy breathing echoed behind her, a constant reminder of the danger that pursued her. The wolf's pursuit became a methodical, terrifying search. He moved through the cottage like a predator cornering its prey, his senses heightened, his focus absolute. Each room was a potential kill zone, each shadow a possible hiding place. He paused at the doorway of what appeared to be a small pantry. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, ajar just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness within. A faint scent of herbs and spices mingled with the underlying metallic tang of blood, a disturbing combination that made the wolf's lip curl. He pushed the door open with his snout, the hinges groaning in protest, the sound echoing in the tense silence. The pantry was cramped and cluttered, shelves lined with jars and bottles, their contents casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air was thick and still, broken only by the frantic scurrying of a small mouse in the corner. The wolf stepped inside, his massive frame filling the doorway, blocking out most of the light. His red eyes scanned the shelves, his gaze lingering on the dark spaces between the jars. He sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring, trying to isolate Red Riding Hood's scent. He heard a faint rustling sound from behind a stack of wooden crates. His ears perked up, his body tensing. He moved towards the crates, his claws scraping against the rough wooden floor. He reached out a paw, his claws extended, and slowly, deliberately, began to pull the crates aside. Suddenly, a jar fell from one of the shelves, crashing to the floor with a loud shatter. The wolf whirled around, his heart leaping in his chest. His eyes darted to the source of the noise, but there was nothing there. Just shattered glass and spilled spices, their pungent aroma filling the air. He growled, his frustration mounting. It was a false alarm, a trick of the shadows and his own heightened nerves. But the sound had revealed his position, and he knew Red Riding Hood was close. He turned back to the crates, his movements more cautious now. He pulled the last crate aside, revealing a small space behind it. Empty. His growl deepened, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the cottage. He was losing his patience. He wanted the kill. He backed out of the pantry, his eyes sweeping the room one last time. He caught a glimpse of something red, a flash of color in the corner of his eye. He spun around, his gaze fixed on a small gap between the wall and a large, overturned cabinet. The cabinet was lying on its side, its contents spilled out across the floor, creating a chaotic jumble of debris. He moved towards the cabinet, his steps slow and deliberate, his senses on high alert. He could hear her breathing now, rapid and shallow, coming from behind the overturned furniture. He reached the cabinet and peered into the narrow gap. Red Riding Hood was there, huddled against the wall, her red cloak partially concealed by a pile of broken dishes. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, her small body trembling. She clutched her hunting knife, her hand shaking so violently that the blade rattled against the broken china. The wolf grinned, a display of sharp teeth and cruel satisfaction. He had her. He reached into the gap, his claws scraping against the wood, his red eyes gleaming in the dim light. Red Riding Hood braced herself, her heart pounding in her ears. The wolf's clawed hand descended, but before it could reach her, she twisted, her knife flashing upwards. The blade plunged into the wolf's arm, deep into the muscle. The wolf roared in pain, his grip loosening slightly. Red Riding Hood seized the opportunity, kicking him away with all her strength. She scrambled to her feet, her body aching, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The wolf, his arm dripping blood, glared at her with renewed fury. The old woman's skin was now torn and shredded, revealing the monstrous wolf beneath. The illusion was shattered.
You tricked me.
The wolf snarled, his voice a guttural growl. Red Riding Hood stood her ground, her knife held steady.
You killed my grandmother,
she said, her voice filled with a cold, righteous anger.
And you terrorized this village. You're going to pay.
The wolf lunged again, but this time, Red Riding Hood was ready. She moved with a speed and agility that belied her small stature, dodging his attacks, her knife a blur of motion. She slashed at his legs, hindering his movements. She stabbed at his chest, her blade finding the gaps in the tattered remains of the old woman's skin. The wolf roared and stumbled, his strength failing him. The fight spilled out of the cottage into the ruined village. The flickering flames cast shadows, turning the battle into a macabre dance of death. Red Riding Hood fought with a skill and ferocity that surprised even herself. She was no longer the innocent girl in the red cloak. She was a warrior, a survivor, fueled by a righteous rage. She knew she had to end this. She couldn't let the wolf escape again, not after everything he had done. She saw her chance. The wolf, weakened and injured, stumbled, his footing unsteadies on the uneven ground. Red Riding Hood lunged, her knife raised high. She plunged the blade into the wolf's heart. The wolf roared, a sound of pain and disbelief. His body convulsed, his red eyes widening in shock. He looked down at the knife protruding from his chest, his lifeblood staining the ground. He staggered backward, his massive body trembling. He tried to speak, to utter one last growl of defiance, but his voice failed him. He crashed to the ground, his body landing with a heavy thud. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on his form. His limbs twitched, his breath rattling in his throat. Then, silence. The big bad wolf was dead. Red Riding Hood stood over his body, her chest heaving, her knife dripping with blood. She had done it. She had killed the monster that had terrorized the village, the beast that had murdered her grandmother. But the victory felt hollow. The village was in ruins. Many lives were lost. The joy she expected was replaced with a profound sadness. She knelt beside the wolf's body, her gaze fixed on his lifeless eyes. She saw not the monster, but a creature twisted by darkness, a victim of a hunger he couldn't control. The firefighters and police arrived, their faces grim as they surveyed the scene. They found Red Riding Hood standing over the wolf's corpse, her red cloak stained with blood, her expression a mixture of grief and exhaustion. They stared at her, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. This small woman, this celebrity, had accomplished what they could not. She had defeated the big bad wolf. The news of the wolf's death spread quickly through the devastated village. The survivors emerged from their hiding places, their faces etched with relief and gratitude. They hailed Red Riding Hood as a hero, their savior. But Red Riding Hood did not feel like a hero. She felt weary, heartbroken. She had killed a monster, but the cost had been too high. As the firefighters worked to extinguish the remaining flames, and the police began the grim task of identifying the dead, Red Riding Hood walked away from the carnage. She walked alone, her red cloak a stark contrast to the blackness of the ruined village, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. The wolf was dead, but the darkness he had unleashed would linger, a haunting reminder of the night the big bad wolf came to town. Chapter 13. Conclusion. Red Riding Hood walked away from the carnage, her red cloak a stark contrast to the blackness of the ruined village, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. She didn't head towards the gathered villagers, their cries of relief and gratitude fading behind her. She couldn't face their praise, not yet. She walked until she reached the edge of the woods, the same woods that had once been a place of childhood wonder, now tainted by blood and terror. She stopped at the tree line, the first rays of dawn painting the eastern sky, a bruised purple and orange. Turning back, she surveyed the devastation. The cottage, her grandmother's cottage, was a charred skeleton. The village, once a place of simple lives and quiet routines, was a graveyard of broken dreams. The faces of the survivors, emerging from their shock, were etched with a grief that mirrored her own. Red Riding Hood closed her eyes, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. She saw again her grandmother's face, twisted in pain, the wolf's red eyes gleaming with malevolent hunger, though the memory was a knife twisting in her heart. But amidst the grief, a new feeling began to stir within her. It wasn't triumph, but a grim resolve. The darkness that had invaded this place, this darkness that lurked in the hearts of men and beasts, could not be allowed to spread. The innocent could not be left defenseless. She opened her eyes, and they burned with a newfound fire. She was no longer just a little Red Riding Hood, the celebrity, the girl in the red cloak. She was something more. She was a protector. A guardian. She turned away from the ruined village, not in retreat, but with a newfound purpose. She would carry the burden of this night, the memory of the fallen, the knowledge of the evil that stalked the shadows. She would use her fame, her strength, her skills to hunt the darkness, to protect the vulnerable, to ensure that what happened here would never happen again. The red cloak, once a symbol of innocence, became a banner of defiance, and as she walked into the dawn, into the unknown, she carried with her the hope that even in the darkest of nights, a spark of courage could ignite, and a warrior could rise. The end. Wolf Tales. Produced by